Ethics is a real discussion of competing conceptions of the good. This is just the corporate anti-shoplifting rules.
All right, hope everybody's doing well. We're about to start a new unit in the class, and so I wanted to provide a little bit of an introduction, to this next portion of the class. Usually, I cover meta-ethics first and then cover normative ethical theory. So, depending on what I'm doing this semester you're watching this, we may cover them in reverse order, but that's usually the way I do it. So, some of these ideas may already be a little bit familiar to you. Let's take a look here then at an introduction to normative ethical theories, just trying to introduce the type of theories that we're going to be looking at in this next portion of the course. So we've been talking about moral philosophy, of course. I started off this semester by trying to give a more precise definition of philosophy that includes both the subject matter and the activity of philosophy. So I used this working definition from Klosowski's book, The Intellectual Activity Attempting to Discern and Remove Contradictions Among Non-Empirical, Reasoned Beliefs that Have Universal Importance with the resulting benefit of achieving a greater understanding of the world and our place within it. Certainly a mouthful there, but it gets to the point. Philosophy is about reflecting upon the ideas that we use, identifying potential or apparent contradictions, then looking at the arguments for each of those different propositions that it can't both be true, trying to figure out which one is most likely to be true or which one is true if we can get that far. And then, of course, also, we've talked about more specifically moral philosophy, where the central purpose is, Postman says, is to secure valid principles of conduct and values that can be instrumental in guiding human actions and producing good character, right? So from another introductory text on moral philosophy there. So notice in both of those, they emphasize the idea of reflection and argumentation. And the definition of moral philosophy there, trying to secure valid principles of conduct, that's what we'll be looking at in the next unit here. Each of these theories is going to focus on identifying and defending some prescriptive or normative standard of right conduct and good living. In other words, some standard that will help us distinguish good, bad, right, wrong, permissible, evil, vicious, virtuous, these sorts of things, right? These evaluative notions, these judgments, right? These value judgments that we've been worried about all semester. In the meta-ethics section of the course, we worried about the status of those values. And of course, we looked at objectivism or universalism or moral realisms, and then moral anti-realisms on the other side, and looked at that big debate, as well as most likely a debate over the problem of motivation in meta-ethics. Is it always rational to be moral or not? Likely, we're going to encounter that motivation question again here in the normative ethics section as well. But so this is, again, the basic idea. The theories we've been looking at in meta-ethics, those were about the status of prescriptive claims. Are they universal or relative, for example, to particular people or cultures? And now we're going to look at these theories that purport to be universal and objective. At least most of them do. Most normative theories presuppose some version of universalism or objectivism with regard to morality, and then go about the business of trying to defend that particular standard, like the golden rule, for example. So, if you're still skeptical about the possibility of universal or objectively true moral truths or judgments, I would make sure and go back and review some of the arguments that we looked at, the ones that we covered, for the skeptical positions, the subjectivist and relative positions, seem to run into quite a few problems. And because of that, many philosophers reject, it's pretty much, I think, a consensus view. Most philosophers, both the canonical ones and in contemporary thought, tend to reject relativism and subjectivism and go about the business of trying to identify which of these plausibly objective or universal theories might be the correct single true morality. And so you'll see that occurring as we go through the readings. They're arguing for these positions, right? So again, we've talked about meta-ethics. That first definition of philosophy was easily kind of grasped in the meta-ethic debate, where we have this clear contradiction between the moral realist or objectivist and universalist on the one side, and the anti-realist, the relativist and subjectivist on the other side, and the skeptics on the other side. And again, we saw how a lot of those very influential arguments and interesting arguments nevertheless ran into several problems. So again, many philosophers, when it comes to normative ethics, are going to reject the relativist and subjectivist views and adopt or presuppose some version of realism and then get about the business of trying to defend some normative standard. Almost all of the theories that we will look at in this next portion of the course presuppose some version of objectivism or universalism. The odd ones out are like the moral contractarianism, but the rest of them are pretty much all presuppose some kind of realist view or objectivist and universalist view of morality. And then try to identify which one is true, right? And so again, we've talked about normative ethics in relationship to other normative or prescriptive subjects, including religion, law and politics, and etiquette. And of course, various moral theories will have different ways of drawing that borderline. And in the portions of this class, we're going to worry about the relationship between morality and religion, for example. We'll worry less about politics and etiquette, but we will cover a unit on religious ethics. So again, we talked about moral philosophy in the broader sense, and then moral theory maybe in a more narrow, strict sense of that term theory, as an explanation of some phenomena based on some fundamental or general principles that are themselves independent of the phenomena and supported by some kind of reason or evidence. And the idea here, there's a little bit of a wrinkle. We can worry about, how narrow or broad to use this term theory. You'll see some of the readings engage that issue along the way. So you will see people drawing a distinction between a moral theory in a narrow sense and moral philosophies in a broader sense. So that is something to watch out for. But the theories in this section aren't going to be worried so much about whether it's objective or universal. They're going to be theories that attempt to identify and defend some plausibly universal or objective standard of right conduct or good living. In other words, a standard like that golden rule is a normative standard. It's a version of a normative theory. It says you ought to treat others as you would want to be treated. And so that helps us distinguish what's right and wrong. Right? So a little bit more here. Normative theories typically begin from one of two questions. How your framing question starts out is going to shape the kind of theory that you have. And so some begin with the question, what ought I do? While others will begin from the question, how ought I live, or what kind of person should I be? Those second and third questions are much broader in scope than the first question, which is more about, a particular action and whether it's right, wrong, or permissible, as opposed to the broader question of how should I live my life more generally, or what kind of character traits should I have? And as you'll see, we'll go through a number of ethical theories in this section, normative theories like egoism, moral contractarianism. That's the odd one out in terms of the objectivist stuff and the metaethical stuff there. And then deontology and utilitarianism and a version of virtue ethics. And so egoism, ethical, we'll look at a couple different types of egoism, but ethical egoism says that right conduct is defined by whatever's in my self-interest, my reflective, enlightened, and rational self-interest, not just what I happen to immediately want. That's not what they're getting at there. Moral contractarianism is a social contract view of morality. So here morality is an invention in the Hobbesian version of this. And so the basis of morality are the agreements that we make with one another in pursuing our self-interest. So self-interest will play a role in a couple different theories there. Deontology, basic idea in deontology is called the categorical imperative. That's an obligation binding on everybody regardless of their personal interests. We'll formulate the categorical imperative a couple of different ways. One of the most famous ones is that you should only act on maxims that can be willed as a universal law of morality. We'll look at utilitarianism. The basic idea there is the greatest happiness, or the utility principle, which says that actions are right insofar as they tend to produce the best outcomes for the most people, and wrong as they tend to produce the worst outcomes for the most people. And then virtue ethics. We'll look at a version of character ethics from Aristotle. The basic idea there is called not the golden rule, but the golden mean, which says that a virtue is a mean between excess and deficiency. Notice that's different than saying you ought to treat others the way you would want to be treated. That's about an action. The golden mean's about a character trait there, right? So some subtle differences to watch out for as we go through this material. There are some key elements of normative standards, right? So I've just listed some normative standards there on that last slide, and they have certain characteristics that usually they share either all or most of these characteristics. So again, first, obviously they're going to be prescriptive or normative. Again, we're using that term not in the statistical sense, but in the evaluative sense of an ideal standard, a criteria for moral evaluation or value judgments. Most of these theories, again, in the normative section, are going to involve some kind of idea of objectivity or universality. We'll look at two really influential universalizability arguments. One of them is deontological and comes from Kant. The other one is a version of utilitarianism. And again, these principles are supposed to be impartial, person neutral or objective in that sense, that person neutral sense of objectivity. That it's not just a matter of my personal feelings, right? So that's a really key idea here, is that these theories are trying to be based on a principle or a standard that is not something that is merely a matter of my personal, contingent, and particular wants and desires or interests, but it's beyond that, right? Again, impartial could be applied neutrally. And then moral reasons, normative standards are often thought to provide reasons that are overriding. In other words, they trump other reasons for action, like mere self-interest or personal preference, or just for financial gain or something like that. Maybe moral reasons trump other sorts of personal reasons, for example, right? So again, overriding. The normative standards are going to have to be a public principle. If we're going to expect people to act a particular way, they've got to know what the standard is, so it has to be publicly accessible by our reason, right, and reflection. And then, of course, we need a standard that's practical, applicable, and can help us with some real everyday issues, not just something that's just a purely theoretical matter. We need a theory to help us live, right? How should I live? What kind of person should I be? We're looking for a theory that could help with that. And then some other key concepts in normative ethical theory that are going to pop up over and over and over again. So again, you want to be familiar with these. Start familiarizing yourself with them. Pay attention to them when they occur and pop up in the readings. If you're not already familiar with them, I would pause here and start looking up these terms so you can start familiarizing yourself with some of our basic vocabulary. So again, objective, subjective, universal, relative. We've been talking about those already this semester. Descriptive, right, versus prescriptive or normative. Again, important for us. I'm not simply describing what's going on. I'm evaluating what's going on, right? Then we're looking for a standard that's either going to help us identify virtues and vices, positive or negative character traits, or help us identify and distinguish between actions that are permissible or optional, do them or not do them without wrongdoing, impermissible, required to refrain from it, or an obligation, I'm required to do it, right? And then again, virtues and vices, character traits that are either positive or negative. Again, we will look at some universalizability arguments, so those are going to pop up here. We're going to encounter a lot of thought experiments in this portion of the class, both as in terms of how various theories apply to the same or similar thought experiments, and also use those as a way of getting us ourselves thinking critically about various moral issues, right? So we'll encounter some trolley problems, some murderers at the door, some ticking time bombs, and some stuff like that this semester. Don't worry, I won't put you in a Saw movie. Right? And then other key ideas here. Teleology, objective or in the sense of a goal, right, or an outcome. Some moral theories are teleological. They base right or good conduct on whether that conduct or character traits brings about some particular good or end. Consequentialism. Some moral theories are consequentialist. They're usually distinguished from deontic theories. Deontic theories claim that features inherent to the action itself rather than its consequences make it right or wrong. And then we're going to have some action-based theories or character-based theories. Again, if you're starting off with the question, what ought I do? It's probably going to be an action-based theory and focused on that, as opposed to the question, what kind of person should I be or how should I live? That's going to be more about a broader question about character traits or what kind of character traits should I develop? What kind of person should I be? Right? And then these theories are going to posit something that's intrinsically valuable, or at least plausibly intrinsically valuable, versus things that are merely valuable because they have use value. So, for example, if the hedonism claims that, and many of us think of hedonism, it feels good, do it. There's a more sophisticated view of that we'll look at here in our philosophical examination of morality. But if pleasure is an intrinsic good, or if rational personhood is an intrinsic good or intrinsically valuable, then those are the kinds of values that we could base our theory around, or could serve as the foundation of our moral theory. So watch out for distinctions in each theory about what they claim is intrinsically valuable versus instrumentally valuable. And then along with that, criteria for moral standing or status or moral consideration, however you want to say that. In other words, like, so I've got a pen here, right? Here's my pen. Can you see my pen in there? There's my pen. Don't know why that's not showing up there. Got a bad angle. So my pen it can neither feel pain or have experiences, and it's not a rational being. So I probably don't have moral obligations to it the way that I might have, or probably do have, rather, obligations to sentient beings or rational persons. So again, different statuses or criteria for moral standing there. All of those are going to be key ideas to keep in mind while we go through all these different normative theories in this portion of the class. And then different domains of evaluation. Some of these theories, the target of moral evaluation is going to be different. I've already distinguished character theories, character-based theories from action-based theories, but when it comes to action-based theories, we could further worry about whether we should be focused on evaluating the consequences of the action or the maxim of the action. It's a fancy word for talking about the intent or the motive of the action, as opposed to the consequences. So again, different things that we might be, that according to different theories, they're going to have different targets of moral evaluation or objects of moral evaluation there. So again, some important points of comparison and contrast for all these theories to keep in mind as we go through them over the course of the next several classes. Another thing that we're going to run into occasionally is this idea of common sense morality. And philosophy often begins with reflection upon our common sense beliefs, and we see that popping up in moral philosophy as well. And philosophers have tried to pin down what are really the key elements of common sense morality. And of course, there's some debate there, but there are some common things that keep popping up. And so I'll give you two basic accounts of common sense morality to keep in mind as well. The first one comes from Sedgwick, who was a utilitarian thinker in the 19th century. And so it might not be surprising if you're already a little bit familiar with that view. If you're not, don't worry about it. We will cover it. That he thinks there's a general duty to do good and a general prohibition on harming people, as well as stealing, lying, and promise breaking. So again, common sense morality. We generally don't like it when people take our stuff that we've rightly acquired. We don't like it when people lie to us, and we think people ought to keep their promises, right? And so how are these different theories going to handle those sorts of issues? Then another element of common sense morality is that we have special personal obligations to our intimates, like our friends and families. You probably wouldn't think it bad of me if I took off work to go be with my wife in the hospital, whereas I might not take off work to go spend time with, a random student in my class in the hospital, right? So I might have certain obligations to my parents or my children or my spouse or my friends that I don't have with other people. And so we'll run into, whether various moral theories can account for some of these aspects of common sense morality. And if they don't, does that count against the theory? Does that count as a point against the theory, or does it count as a point against common sense morality? We'd have to worry about those sorts of things. And then, of course, another element here is that it's permissible to give one's own good more or less weight to the good of others when making my moral decisions. And so the idea here is that it's up to me whether I give on any particular moral decision your concerns more weight than my own, right? But that's a thing that might be up to me, at least, with having some discretion about that matter there. And then another account of common sense morality comes from a textbook that I sometimes use, although I'm not using it this semester. It's by Jonathan Wolfe. You can find examples of that book everywhere. It's just called Introduction to Moral Philosophy, and he's got a reader that goes along with it. And in his textbook, he's a contemporary philosopher and scholar. He lays out a couple of elements of what he thinks is involved in common sense morality. And so again, he states a couple of different things here. Some of which seem to presuppose some version of objectivism or realism, and so that's a thing to keep in mind here as well. And we've already seen probably Machian error theory tried to challenge some of these, right? For example, that some things are morally wrong, right? So that's a key thing in common sense morality. You'd probably think that it's obvious that I shouldn't go around randomly punching people, and that's obviously wrong. And that might include things like my conduct, actions, or character traits. And then a meta-ethical element in Wolff's view of common sense morality is that some statements, some ethical statements, are straightforwardly true or false. Again, Mackey's error theory challenged that view. But here it's a part of common sense morality. And if you think about, Wolff has some evidence here. Think about how you speak about morality in our everyday lives and how people tend to talk about morality. We certainly don't treat our debates over abortion or serious issues over morality as if they were equivalent to debates over, whether Taylor Swift's latest album is as good as her first one or something like that, right? An aesthetic matter. Then he also points out, Wolff, another meta-ethical element, that it's possible to know that some things are right and wrong, right? So that there could be genuine moral knowledge as a part of our common sense morality as well. Again, another meta-ethical element there. And then he says if another element, this is the fourth one here, if people do things that they know to be wrong, then it's right to blame or criticize them for doing so. You've probably heard people talk to you and say, you're old enough to know better than to do X, Y, or Z now, right? And so that seems to it's holding you accountable or holding me accountable for things that we should have known better than to do, right? So he counts that among common sense morality. And then lastly, he says it's generally possible for those who have acted in one way to have acted in another way. In other words, common sense morality seems to presuppose some account of free will, that I can choose to do some things rather than others. If it wasn't that, then we would have a hard time blaming or praising people, right? And so some two different accounts there of common sense morality. Again, they have some differences, but I'm putting them up just as two examples for us to work with when we see the idea of common sense morality pop up in the course of either lectures or in other readings as we go through this semester.
Okay, wait here. I want to come with. Don't come with. It's boring. It's business stuff.
What kind of business do you do in a garage? This seems a little shady.
Right, yeah, like nothing shady ever happened in a fully furnished office. You ever hear about Wall Street, Morty? You know what those guys do in their fancy boardrooms? They take their balls and they dip them in cocaine and wipe them all over each other. Grandpa goes around and he does his business in public because Grandpa isn't shady. Oh, crap. Hey, what's up?
Hey, Rick! Here you go, 3,000 flurbos. Do you have the weapon?
Can we please? This is my grandson, Morty.
Well, hi, Morty. I'm Krombopolis Michael. I'm an assassin. I buy guns from your grandpa.
Here, go away.
Ooh, yeah, this looks deadly. So this shoots antimatter? My target can't be killed with regular matter. Nice to meet you, Morty. Listen, if you ever need anybody murdered, please give me a call.
You're
very
giving him
discreet.
a card?
I have no code of ethics. I will kill anyone, anywhere. Children, animals, old people, doesn't matter. I just love killing.
You sell weapons to killers for money?
Ugh, you've got what the intergalactic call a very planetary mindset, Morty. It's more complicated out here. These are flurbos. Do you understand what 2 humans can accomplish with 3,000 of these?
What?
An entire afternoon at Blips and Chips! Oh, this place is the best. It's got beer, games, prizes, and you can never tell what time it is.
You sold a gun to a murderer so you could play video games?
Yeah, sure. I mean, if you spend all day shuffling words around, you can make anything sound bad.